This is ESPN Esports. I'm Arda Ocal. Happy to be joined by Peter Dunn, who is the head coach of Mad Lions. He announced very recently that he will be parting ways with Mad Lions, seeking other opportunities in League of Legends. He joins us now to talk about that and more. Peter, how are you today?
Fine. This is actually my first off day since for the past 6 months. So definitely enjoying the rest afterwards. I think that's the way.
Why
Disappointing, but it's good to have a break.
why on earth are you doing a media interview on your off day? Why not take the time off and just stretch out for a few days? No? Got to get back
I'm
on
a
the
sucker
grind,
for
huh?
punishment. Sucker for
Yeah.
punishment.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I want to dive into all of this. The first thing I want to mention, though, is that some people might be surprised to hear that you were actually the head coach of Mad Lions. You actually posted this on Reddit. You gave a long explanation of exactly how the coaching system worked at Mad Lions because a lot of people visibly see Mac on stage and not necessarily see you visibly coaching Mad Lions. So, can you just explain to people who didn't read your explainer on Reddit how the coaching system worked at Mad Lions this season?
So I think it's worth saying that this is a coaching system that kind of I developed personally, but it's inspired by where I learned coaching. And in Asia, so I started my career coaching in China, and you always had a clear distinction in roles between a head coach who was sort of in charge of the team, who would make sure, I don't know, the culture was right, who would do the long term planning. Um, and somebody who was a strategic coach. And the strategic coach is the person who would lead review and be on stage when people were allowed to be on stage later. And those were two very distinct roles. I mean, I think maybe the best known example is somebody like Koma on SK Telecom was what we
Mhm.
would call a strategic coach. He wasn't the head coach. And the most important difference between, for instance, a head coach in the Chinese or the Korean system and, say, a GM is that a head coach is responsible for a lot of day to day in person coaching with the team. So, if you had to ask what was the difference between my role and Mac's role, basically, I would be there to do long term planning, to do scouting, to make sure that everything was functioning. I would lead um, I would lead staff meetings and I would kind of have the final veto if something was going drastically wrong. Although basically that was a veto that was never used.
Mm.
Um, Day to day, I was involved in coaching. Mad Lions have a very specific coaching system, which is we use a three coach system, and what this means is you normally have, for lack of a better word, let's call them Coach A, Coach B, Coach C. Coach A is the person who's leading scrims. What you would normally think of, I guess, in a Western point of view, as sort of your head coach. Coach B is assistant coach, the person who's providing backup to what the head coach is saying. And Coach C is what we would call a spot coach or a position coach. The difference, I think, comes in how Mad Lions would run scrims, which is if you think about reviewing a scrim. Most teams, I think, would spend 25 minutes, let's say 25 minutes, 30, let's say 25 minutes, reviewing a scrim after the scrim has been played. And I think with Mad Lions, we would generally spend about 15 minutes reviewing the scrim and 10 minutes on focused one-to-one feedback.
Okay.
And this meant that each of us, Cass, Mac, and I, would all have individual responsibilities. At the start of the day, we would have one person that we would work with. And in those 10 minutes, we would spend one-to-one time giving feedback specifically to that person, so that we could spend a lot of time helping people fix their individual mistakes in an environment where they're not kind of being called out in front of their teammates. And it also allowed us to give more specific feedback. So you don't want to be talking about 80 carries wave at 5 minutes 30 when the enemy, when your top laner, jungler, and your mid lane are all there in the room. It just doesn't help them. It just wastes
Sure.
their time. And we want it to be as efficient as possible.
Was that
So
was just to interject, just to because a question popped in my head there. Is that a strategy that you decided to utilize specifically for Mad Lions due to the young nature of the team? You had a lot of rookies on the team, for example, or was this something that you find success no matter who's on the team?
so generally, I think that this is how I found success historically. So this was the
Okay.
system. So I was the on-stage coach. I was head coach and on-stage coach 2 years ago in 2018 with Mac. with Duke being my coach B and Mac being my coach C.
Mhm.
Last year, it was a Duke Mac me system, but with Duke being the strategic coach, I guess you would say. I tend to find that the three coach system works better than a two coach system, and better than a four coach system. And the reason why I think it works better than two coach system is basically in a two coach system, it becomes very hard to chat. There's a clear hierarchy in sort of the coaching system, and if you have a two coach system, it can become very hard for the assistant coach to challenge the head coach and to bring new ideas forward to
Okay.
the head coach. You sometimes this is a well known aspect of sort of aviation theory, in that the older person in the cockpit is never the captain. It's always the more junior person, the
Okay.
more junior pilot, uh, the younger pilot who is the captain, and the older one tends to be his. Uh, I don't know what they call it, assistant captain or
So there was good
yeah,
cohesion between the Mad Lions coaches. You guys worked
yeah,
very well together.
exactly. And with a three coach system, obviously you can always have an imbalance of two versus one if something goes really badly wrong. And this is again another reason why the head coach is not the coach leading scripts, right? Because the head coach
Okay.
can be more of a neutral arbiter, can also provide feedback to both playing and coaching staff if they're not leading the script. And
So,
that's why we kind of use the system. If you add too many more than three coaches, I found that it tends to grind down. It tends to make reviews less efficient, because as a coach, you kind of want to give your opinion in a scrim. And if you have four or five coaches, generally your reviews tend to be just coaches talking amongst themselves, which is not ideal. So that's why we settled on the three coaches.
so I do want to go in sequential order because there's so many questions to ask as we go along the way, even before Worlds. But one thing I do want to ask is, with you exploring other options for Mad Lions, does this extend to all coaches, or is this just you that's looking at other options right now?
This is just me. This is a long-term thing. I mean, I don't want people to get the idea that this is as a result of things that happened over the course of this year. I've been training Mac to replace me for at least 12 months now. And I think if people have followed Mad Lions closely, you'll notice that maybe at the start of the split, I went on the first Euphoria episode of the year, for instance. And gradually over time, Mac has been assuming more and more of those responsibilities. And this is kind of something um, that we've been planning for a long time. And I'm sure Mac is more than capable of fulfilling his responsibilities going into next year. We've worked together, Mac and I, for 4 years now, in various roles, and I think he's very well equipped to continue the success that Matt have had this year, and I look forward to watching from outside.
So that's
I'll
it.
be cheering for them.
Yeah, that's a very interesting comment to make then, because a lot of people watching this might have just assumed that this change was coming due to how Mad Lions performed at World. So you're saying that this was already in the works as early as a year ago.
Yes. So basically, when I joined, when Splice were accepted into franchising. I was the first person that the org turned to as the first person they wanted to sign. And we signed a 2-year contract. And at the end of last year, I felt that I was maybe reaching towards the end of my career. I'm 33 now. I was the oldest person at Worlds last year, playing or coaching staff by at least 24 months, which which really which really rung a little bit of an alarm bell in my head. I needed
I
to
know
think
the
about what I
feeling,
wanted to
by the
do.
way.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
I mean, I'm not even that old by normal standards. I'm only
Yeah,
33, but definitely in this industry, that's essentially a dinosaur. Um, but there was we had a decision for which direction we wanted to go forward next year, and Marty, who was my boss at the time, asked me, is this something that you want to do for sure moving forward? Would you like an extension? Can we talk about an extension? And I wasn't able to give him an answer
Mhm.
because I felt I'd been coaching for almost a decade. I was in my 8th year, the start of my 8th year of coaching, and to be honest, I wasn't. I was thinking about if this was something I wanted to do long term. Once I wasn't sure that I could give an answer, we talked about, okay, so how can we ensure that Mad Lions continue to have long-term sustained success? What do we need? We need a younger roster, which we can continue to develop long-term. We can have coaching staff that that I want you, Marty asked me, I want you to invest as much time as you possibly can to help Mac reach this level and continue to lead this organization after you've gone. Uh, I will say that this Mad Lions roster, this Mad Lions 2020 roster, is the greatest joy of any roster you could possibly imagine to coach. I'm sure many people have seen Kazi's social media presence. All I will say is that he's exactly like this in person. And kind of in April and May, I began to think, maybe this is something I want to do long term. This is something I want to sort of fully commit. My 30s and my 40s too. But of course, by that point, we'd already made commitments, and it wasn't. I felt it wasn't the right thing to do to Mac. It wasn't the right thing to do to Mad Lions because we'd already made these long-term plans. It was extremely painful at once. I don't know if many of your viewers know this, but basically, as soon as I came out of quarantine, I had a very serious muscle strain in my leg, which basically stopped me walking. So I spent 2 weeks of quarantine, perfectly fine. For some reason, I fell asleep on the last day of quarantine, and I woke up with an insanely painful leg that basically made it almost impossible to walk. And unfortunately, I had to watch a lot of this World Championship from my hotel room, which was rather rough. Luckily, I was able to be there, or unluckily, I guess, for the Supermassive Series, which we ended up losing. But maybe if you ask me, do I have any regrets from this year? That's my regret. I don't really have any regrets from seeing how the team progressed. Maybe we could have performed better in certain key situations. Definitely, there were definitely nerves coming into the Schalke series because we'd had 4 chances to lock in our place at Worlds, and this was our 4th and final shot. But definitely, I have no regrets from this year, other than I just wish my health was there for the World Championship, because for me, there's basically a rule for World Championships, which is that if they're not in China, I qualify, and if they're in China, I don't qualify. So this was my first ever time that I managed to qualify for World Championships in China, and to have things turn out the way they did was deeply upsetting, especially because I knew at that point, and so did most of the coaching staff, that I wouldn't be working with this roster next year. And if I have regrets, I would say that would be it, but I have no regrets at all for the rest of this year, and I'm sure the team will continue to progress and do excellent next season.
So I'd love to go in sequential order because I have many questions along the way here. So let's start at the LEC Summer Playoffs. By then, Mad Lions had occupied. It was this battle between Mad Lions and Rogue, right? It was like keeping up with the Joneses in a way. Like you win, I lose, you lose. Like back and forth for so many weeks. And then finally, we get to the playoffs, and it seemed as though, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed as though Mad Lions just didn't find their footing in many parts of the playoffs. Like it just didn't seem like the winning team that the fans had become accustomed to through the regular season. What happened in the postseason, in your opinion?
So I think it's actually worth. Could we go a couple of weeks before the end of the
Sure.
postseason? Because I think that's where the story best goes from. So I think in Mad Lions and Rogue, you had 2 very different competing styles and philosophy for how to play the game. Ironically, if you ask me to compare Rogue to any team in EU from the past 3 or 4 years, I would say Rogue was the spliced 2019 team, maybe slightly stronger mechanics, but extremely solid, didn't drop games to teams lower than them in the table. The only teams that were really able to beat Rogue this season were G2, us, and SK. And SK were on a really big run at the time where they'd beaten us, they'd beaten G2, and they ended up beating Rogue. And this was their kind of hot streak that got them into playoffs. Whereas Mad Lions, we knew from the start of spring that this was not going to be a roster which was a very stable roster. All of our players in Mad Lions are very explosive players, and when you prioritize, this explosiveness and this sort of lack of fear, there's going to be a downside, right? You can on your day win a best of 5 against G2, and also drop games to Legacy at Worlds. And this is something that obviously, as the players mature, they're going to have to improve. But going into playoffs, the number 1 seed, so the automatic qualification going into Worlds, was basically decided in a best of 1 in the final Super Week of the season between Rogue and Mad Lions. And I'm not sure if people remember how that game finished, but Rogue got a very big early lead because we made some boneheaded decisions in the early game. We fought our way back by playing aggressive, kind of higher risk style League of Legends. And then it ended with us getting the Inferno Soul with a Cogmore, which basically is an auto win. And as we were getting the Inferno Soul, Rogue were able to cancel our backs and backdoor us. And that's how number one seed was decided. Obviously, this was a bit of a blow. Obviously, we
Heartbreaking.
hadn't. Yeah, it was heartbreaking. We hadn't really prepared much for the Schalke series. We mainly just focused on that Rogue best of one, and morale was not so good going into the Schalke game. And obviously, Schalke were able to complete their miracle run by beating us and make it into playoffs. I would say that we rebounded pretty well into the series against G2. G2 are a team that really energize our players. I don't know how much of this has been made public, but some of the lobby chat before Mad Lions G2 series, we played 3 best of 5 series against G2 this year, and some of the trash talk that Wonder, Perks, and Kazi get up to is the funniest thing that I've ever seen. And obviously, Mac and Cass are on stage, and I'm sitting there backstage watching this trash talk going on, laughing my ass off with
Is
Till.
is is
It,
any of it safe for work? Can you give us an example? Anything
uh,
that comes to mind?
so I just want to be clear that this is all in
Yeah,
good
yeah, it's
spirits,
all
right?
in jest, right? They're
Uh,
jabbing each other. We get
yeah,
it.
yeah. And but it would be things like Wonder and Perks would be trash talking Rome, and then Kazi would kind of trash talk Caps back. You know, he would say, because Caps didn't trash talk as much as his teammates. That's just not his style. And he would say, "Oh, are you okay, Caps? Are you there?" This was when they were both playing bot lane, and then they would talk about how he was going to get such large bot priority that he would come and gank Perks at like 3.5 minutes, and he should wait for him and things like this, and expect this kind of thing. All playful banter, all, I mean, yeah, there's maybe a couple of NSFW things which I'm not going to repeat,
Sure.
but basically hilarious stuff. I hope one day it gets released publicly. I'm not sure if it can be. I'm not sure if it's kept on record, but hilarious fun. So always before a G2 series, the team were extremely energized. I felt the series was really, really close against G2. We definitely got smashed in the first game because we didn't really quite understand the meta of the series. But as the series progressed, second game we almost won. Caps had an insane Irelia performance in the second game to pull out a game where we were outscaling and already had a 2K or 3K gold lead. And that was really on Caps. We won game 3, and game 4 was another close game. So 3 of the games extremely close. First game, G2 had a better read over what the meta would be, and we ended up losing to G2 3-1. Obviously, that was then we would still qualify for Worlds though if Rogue beat Fnatic, and Rogue did not beat Fnatic, unfortunately. And this kind of put us in a really, really high stress situation after the G2 series. Honestly, I felt we played really, really well in the G2 series. I think
Hmm.
people kind of undersold. I think we played better against G2 than we did against Schalke in the series that we won, for instance. But G2, like Caps, really, really pulled it out on the day. That was probably his best series in 2020. Hopefully, he'll have a better series at Worlds, but you know what I mean. And coming into the Schalke series, nerves were extremely high, and we pushed ourselves extremely hard. The intensity in practice was a lot greater than usual. Mad Lions are a team that basically, for those who don't know, we scrim only 3 days a week.
Right.
Most teams scrim 4 days a week, and then you have 4 days a week, 2 days of LEC, and one off day. Mad Lions would normally scrim 3 days a week. We would do warm ups before LEC, and the off day it wouldn't be a no. The players would still have to come to work, but there would be a lot of one-to-one focus, scouting focus, individual feedback focus. So we
And
scrim
this
less
goes back
than
to your coaching strategy as opposed
exactly,
to what.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And but before the series against Schalke, we knew that this was our final chance, and the intensity was extremely high. I would say that we kind of knew that this was our last chance, and the players pushed themselves very, very hard, maybe over the limit.
Mm.
Maybe if you wanted to ask what was a mistake that maybe Mad Lions made this year that I made as a head coach, we saw how hard the players were pushing, and rather than maybe scaling it back, we just pushed as hard as we could and just focused full out on the Schalke series. We won the Schalke series.
Did you buy into the Schalke hype? Like, was that in weighing in on the players' minds?
So the weird thing is, I thought the best player on Schalke was Dreams. When nobody was talking about Dreams, everyone was talking about Odawamne and
Gilius?
Abba Faker Dage and
Yeah.
God Gilius. And actually, the person who was making the team function was Dreams. Dreams would be picking. What he would do, for instance, if he was on red side, he would pick a champion like Tam Kench, and he would, if the enemy team had tempo advantage, he would just hide in his jungle and threaten to either go to mid lane or to side lane to defend against potential dives. And Mad Lions, of course, team that really, really like to dive on the side lane, always go for the aggressive play, even if it's a 3v2 or 4v3 dive, we're going for the 4v3 dive. And Dreams would always be there either to preemptively trap the rotation from mid into side, or to be there to come and defend the dive. And we spent a lot of time focusing on Dreams. And basically, if you want to kind of know what our preparation was like for the Schalke series, I would say we spent maybe 3 hours focusing on Dreams and 1 hour on the other 4 players combined.
Wow.
And we were able, basically, by shutting down Dreams, Schalke were relying on Dreams when they didn't have tempo leads to bridge so that they could play their style of game that they like to play. Because his stability allowed Gilius and Abedage to innovate a bit more. Normally in a team, you have the players who provide the structure and the players who provide the innovation. Looking at this from Mad Lions, people who are providing the structure are normally Kazi and to a lesser extent Rome, and the players who are allowed to innovate are Shadow and Kaiser, and to a lesser extent, it depends what champion he's on. He can flex to both sides, either structure or innovation. And
so you beat Schalke?
Yeah, so we beat Schalke, but the problem is that we pushed ourselves too hard.
Okay.
And the rebound from this was really, really dramatic. Normally, we played the best of 5 series on a Friday, and Saturday, sometimes you would scrim, and basically it was clear from a head coach position that I couldn't make my players scrim on that Saturday. I mean, everyone was just too exhausted. And then we came into the Rogue series on the Sunday, kind of underprepared. The intensity was gone a little bit, and you maybe saw this performance. From certain players had a really rough series against Rogue, but this was Mad Lions kind of at their worst that I've seen them. And this was because we neither had the intensity nor the how should I say, nor the preparation, right? So you can either win a series by being fully up for the series and raring to go and let the adrenaline take over, or you can have a more calculated approach where study the opponents, know what they're going to do in advance, and prepare that kind of thing. And we had neither of those. Situations going into the Rogue series, and Rogue just dismantled us. I will
By that
say,
point, how much motivation was there? Like, you had already qualified for Worlds. I'm always fascinated by like what the motivation levels are after a team qualifies for Worlds.
So I will say that Humanoid's motivation was really, really high.
Okay.
Humanoid after that series was, I don't want to say angry, was really, really frustrated after that series. And I would say that I'm not going to call out individual names. I would say that some players were frustrated, and some players were disappointed, right? There's a difference between disappointment and frustration. It's kind of the anger level that you feel. I would say that Humanoid, maybe as a veteran of the team, was by far the most frustrated after that series. It made it, but we promised ourselves we would be better. We would be better coming into Worlds. I'm sure we're going to talk about Worlds in a second. But basically, I in part of the comments, so the teams are given permission to provide feedback. And what part of the feedback that I wrote about the series is I think it's better when you're having a gauntlet system like LEC has, to play the games back to back without the day off, because the day off neither provides you with proper rest nor proper time to prepare for the opponent you're going to play. And it's worth saying that the only team in EU this year and last year, I think, that won games from the lower bracket, which was G2. It was always the teams would play in the bottom of the lower bracket, and then they would lose to the team above, and that team would lose to the team above them, and so on. And I think that's partly
after they got sent there by your team.
Exactly. And sent there by Fnatic as well. I mean, the G2 were really, really good from the lower bracket, and I think people talk about what is the benefit of veterancy, and I think you saw that this year in G2. So we had the rough loss to Rogue, and then we took some time off. Coming into Worlds was a lot of things went wrong. Coming into Worlds, I think that.
So let's start with the preparation. Even before you fly to China, what was preparation like? Like what went into that?
So basically, we took 4 days off. After 3 days off after we lost our series, but we we actually asked the players to come back instead of taking full time off, because there were only 3 teams left in LEC, and that obviously when there's 3 teams, you can't scrim, right? There aren't 2 pairings for the finals weekend. So we came back in and we made sure that Rogue, G2, and Fnatic, whoever was left out of that trio, got scrims, and
Oh, okay.
that's kind of what we did. I would say that going into Worlds, it's important to understand a little bit about the roles that individual coaching staff played on the team. So we had staff who were more concerned with strategic prep and staff that were more concerned with, I guess you call it, performance. One of the big figures on our team was Jake. I think his nickname is Viking. I don't think he has social media, but he's our physio. He's the guy with a really big Viking beard who's yelling out things in the team huddle before every game.
Okay.
And if all coaches had a little bit of responsibility in each area. So for instance, when I say that for scouting, for instance, it wasn't just a case of Mac doing scouting. Mac would do scouting, Cass would do scouting, I would do scouting, and we would all come and compile our results. But if you talk about on game day, what the different responsibilities were, I would say it was Jake and my responsibility to sort of help the players focus and be motivated and be ready to be on stage. And Cass and Mac's job was basically to make sure that our strategic prep was finalized and that kind of thing. I would say Cass and I had more flexibility, but if you had to put it on a sliding scale, Jake was all performance, Mac was all prep, and then Cass and I would fill as needed, with Cass more towards Mac's side and me more towards Jake's side. Coming into Worlds, Jake had an unfortunate illness literally 2 days before we were supposed to fly out, and he wasn't there. And obviously I had my injury coming out of quarantine. And this kind of meant that we were really, really short staffed on the support for players on stage. Our strategic staff were there, but the people who were there to sort of help the players motivate, help the players focus and that kind of thing were not there at Worlds. And I think
There's a set number of people that were allowed to go, right? Was it like 9 or 7 or
yeah, I mean, it was possible to have extra people if
okay.
your organization was willing to finance it. And obviously, Jake was such an important part of the Mad Lions roster. I mean, it was a no brainer
Okay.
as far as I'm aware, that he would come to China with us. But really, I don't want to say that it's choking, right? Or I don't want to say that we had a bad performance on stage because of this, right? But definitely when you have people who've been there to back you up, to help you get mentally in the right place on stage for the entire year, and then suddenly you find yourself in a new environment, you're at World, you're playing against stronger teams, under high pressure situations with more media following you than ever before, especially people like Shadow, who was the only LPL resident jungler at this Worlds. Maybe Casa changed his residency from LMS when it stopped existing, but SOFM is Vietnam, and
Hmm.
Peanut is of course Korean, right? So he was the only LPL resident jungler at Worlds. He a lot of that burden fell on him, and we weren't there as a support staff to back him up. And I think we have to take responsibility for that as a support staff. And I think, in a sense, we kind of failed our players at Worlds, and the results on stage were obvious to see. And obviously, that's something that we had to take responsibility. And obviously, as I was the head coach, I had to take responsibility. Maybe I should have slept at a different angle. Or we should have reassigned roles and reassigned responsibilities, which we didn't do fast enough. And I think it really hit our players. Like the first day, I think it didn't really matter. But after we
Hmm.
lost the series to Team Liquid, it really, really hit after we lost the best of one to Team Liquid.
Was that when the team was at its lowest at Worlds? But
No,
not after the supermassive game. I mean, like just
yeah.
throughout the play-in stage.
I wouldn't say so, but I kind of think that we went into Worlds. I wouldn't say we were complacent, but I would say we were confident,
Okay.
as any major region team should be coming into World Championships.
Yeah.
We knew our group was harder we knew Group A was a harder group than Group B. Even though I think did only one team qualify, only one team qualified from Group A, but we knew, for instance, there were these rumors that INTZ had played scrims against Team Liquid on 140 ping during NA playoffs, and were able to win games. And our first day in China, we scrimmed INTZ, and they won more than half the scrims that they played against us.
Wow.
And so that was a bit of a wake up call. This was before the group draw, and this was a bit of a wake up call. And we definitely thought that they were strong. And we felt that we knew Supermassive was strong already, and we felt that those two and Unicorns of Love were going to be the big emerging region teams. Obviously, 3 teams ended up qualifying from Group B, but definitely in the scrim meta, it looked like Group A was significantly stronger. So we came into the series. The meta that so we were scrimming mainly.
Can I ask what
Korean
other teams, if you're willing to tell me, like what other
Yeah.
teams did you scrim while you were at Worlds?
It's a bit hard because I don't know how much teams mind about this. I will say because the scrims were leaked. There was one day where we scrimmed JDG, and it took us to pieces. Like the first day we scrimmed INTZ and we lost more scrims than we won. Second day we scrimmed JDG, and I mentioned this because the scrims were leaked and they kind of smashed us every single game, and we thought, oh my gosh, what have we let ourselves in for? But after that day, scrim results began to improve, and we were doing really well against a lot of teams that would be considered amongst the favorites right now. I would say that the meta in scrims, so we were mainly scrimming the top teams rather than emerging region teams, and the meta in those scrims was very, very different from the meta that ended up being used in Players. So we had a lot of different priorities, and maybe we didn't adapt fast enough. For instance, Orn was not a champion in the scrims that we were playing, but it turned out to be the most OP champion in Play-ins, and that was something because not only were we playing these teams that were like amongst the favorites to win Worlds, but winning those scrims, we thought, okay, this is how we should be playing the game, and it meant that when things started to go wrong, we didn't adapt quickly. The problem was that even when we were losing on stage, we were still winning in scrims, playing the style that we were playing. So it made it. There was kind of a logical disconnect, especially because we knew that a lot of the games were decided by small individual mistakes. So rather than revamping our biases, I don't think we did that fast enough. And obviously there was a lot of disruption, right? Like, I mean, again, my injury, the fact that we were getting used to a new environment. It wasn't really clear whether we should blame the lack of being used to playing on stage, or whether it was a misread of the meta. And now that I look back, it was a misread of the meta. But that's not how we said.
Before we talk about stuff on the Rift, did anything outside like quarantine or anything like that affect the players? Like, were any of them shook or rattled as a result of the process of getting ready for Worlds?
As quarantine went on, I don't think so. Definitely after our day against JDG. Ooh,
that's more performance based. Yeah, I understand. Okay.
Yeah. But it's worth saying that Mad Lions are a team that we win a lot of scrims. Like the kind of style that you see Mad Lions play on stage is exactly how they play in scrims. I mean, it's kind of really, really aggressive, and maybe when other teams will play more aggressive in scrims and will be more defensive on stage. But if anything, I think this team is more aggressive on stage than they are in scrims, and they're already really aggressive in scrims because it's just how they play the game. It's how somebody like Kazi and Kaiser, you can't tell them not to go in. I mean, they are going to go in. It's a case of how do you deal with the aftermath of them going in. And to be honest, these are the kind of players that we prioritized. So in last off season, so we knew that this was something we would have to build around and strategize around. So if you ask me how things went in quarantine, it was challenging, like it was for all teams, but I wouldn't say that quarantine really set us back. I think it was more about kind of the attention that we were beginning to get, and the kind of realization that, now we're at Worlds, right? And now what you do really, really matters. And looking at the players, I think it didn't really hit them until after we lost the Team Liquid. After we lost the Team Liquid, and they saw all of the NAEU memes, and Freak putting his Arome as Lep thing, then it really hit them, because basically Mad Lions are really great guys. They're rookies. They're really fun. Everyone kind of loves them in a way. But after that Team Liquid thing, they maybe saw something which they hadn't seen before. And I think that, if you ask me, what was the biggest wake-up call, or what was the biggest shift, I think it was at that point. and it affected some players more than others. I mean, obviously, it didn't affect Humanoid at all. He's seen all of this before. He's been called bad things when he was playing in the Turkish league. He's been called bad things when he was playing in the Czech league. He just doesn't care. But definitely, it was the first time for many of our players that they'd received this kind of a backlash, and that definitely hurt our confidence moving forwards. And obviously, as a team that screams aggressive and plays aggressive on stage, you have to have that confidence, because if you hesitate playing this kind of aggressive style, you're doomed, right? You have to be willing to always go for the 60-40 or the 70-30, trusting that you've made the right decision, and that even if the play doesn't work out, oh, it was a 60-40 play or it was a 70-30 play, it was still in our favor. But sometimes, if you go for these aggressive plays, you're kind of guessing where the enemy support is or where the enemy jungle is or things like this. And sometimes they're in the right place to kind of intercept you because they've given up 3 camps on the other side of the map, and you just take your loss. But when you start to doubt yourself, you can't play this kind of play. If you're going to doubt yourself and try to play this aggressive style, you should just play to scale for 35 minutes, like Spice did in 2019. Either go full out or go for the scaling style. If you get caught in the middle, it ends badly, and that's kind of what you saw, I think, for Mad Lions at Worlds this year.
So let's focus now on the Supermassive series. What did you take away from that? And I'd love to also hear about just the mood of the team and yourself in the moments afterwards, or even the hours afterwards.
Mm. So, Supermassive series. I'll be clear that even top level, like top level Mad Lions, Mad Lions when they were first in the league, and performing at a very high level against Supermassive, that matchup was never a 100-0 matchup, right? That was at best an 80-20 matchup. That's if peak Mad Lions.
Mm.
So we knew that this was a losable series, and to be clear, this wasn't peak Mad Lions at Worlds, but even peak Mad Lions, Supermassive had the tools that they could punish you on their day. People like Armut, people like Cacao, definitely they have high variance in their level of play, but when they're on form, like they can just win. Like Cacao can just win against anybody, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. So if you ask me how that series felt, that series didn't feel as bad as losing to Legacy. And I
Mm.
don't want to say bad things about Oceania. It was that losing to Legacy was the point where we kind of gave up on our chance to come first in the group. It was kind of the case of, oh, we could actually be going home if INTZ beat Team Liquid, and we lose that series, we're going to go home without even playing a single best of 5. And I would say that is kind of when we were at our lowest. I think going into Supermassive series, we knew that it was going to be a struggle. We knew that it was going to be a 60-40 series. We felt our matchup was slightly better against Unicorns than it was against Supermassive, but even at our best form, we knew that Supermassive wasn't a 100-0 series.
Okay.
I will say that in this series, Blue Side won every single game, and had we won the Legacy game, maybe we would have been Blue Side in this series, and maybe the series goes in a different direction. Don't want to take away too much from Supermassive. I just highlight that the Blue Side was key in this series. Then going and talking about how the series went, after we beat an INTZ in our playoff, we kind of had one night turnaround, and in that time, we had to ask ourselves, is this a stage issue or is this a meta read issue? And before, up to that point, we'd always been telling ourselves it was a stage issue. But I think kind of in the series, we began to realize that maybe this was a meta issue, and maybe we should be playing more scaling. You maybe saw this in Game 4, where we hadn't scrimmed a single game on Corki or Cassiopeia, which were the champions we played in Game 4 and Game 5.
Mm-hmm.
But after the Syndra, what was happening is Supermassive were basically banning 5 mid laners and picking multiple tanks, which was making champions in Humanoid's champion pool that he wanted to play, like Syndra and Zoe, less effective. And LeBlanc and these kind of assassin champions that he kind of thrives on. And so midway through the series, we realized, look, we need to do something. And I mean, everyone has gone and talked about how unfortunate our draft was in Game 5, where we drafted, four AD champions and Corki into a Malphite. But I think this was mainly because we basically hadn't practiced these comps, but we kind of realized halfway through the series, and also a little bit the night before, maybe our read of the meta is completely wrong. And we've got to just play this kind of scaling style. And that's kind of where we sat. maybe with an extra day preparation, maybe with an understanding that we maybe misread the meta earlier, we could have played more games with Corky, played more games with Cassidon. I mean, Humanoid is a really, really strong Cassidon, but we didn't pull it out in the series into Balulu's Azir. Or maybe we could have picked things like Maokai into Ornn, which you're seeing right now, right? So we ended up banning Ornn every single red side, but we had a theory that we could just pick Maokai into Ornn, and sure, they would first pick Ornn, but we would get more from our first rotation picks. So there were definitely things that could have gone better in the Supermassive series, but we knew it was going to be a slog, and it was a slog. I mean, game one was decided when against Mordek. So Kakao was playing against Mordekaiser as a Hecarim and was able to run in and steal what would have been our Inferno Soul Drake. Even through, because you have like a split second of cast time where Mordekaiser hits you, but before you're actually in the death realm, and in that like 0.25 seconds or whatever it is, he was able to smite the Drake. And maybe that's luck, maybe that's high skill, who knows. But definitely that series was very, very close. And I would say that the team wasn't as downbeat after that series as maybe they were earlier on, because we knew it was going to be a struggle. Whereas maybe we'd come into Worlds thinking, we should be confident. I think the Team Liquid loss and the Legacy loss were much worse than the Supermassive loss. It wasn't that we thought we were doomed. It's just that we knew that it was going to be a struggle, and we were prepared for a struggle. And sometimes, if you're mentally in that state when you lose, you're exhausted, but you're not frustrated. What I will say is that normally after defeat at a world championships or playoffs and things like this, my bad habit is I'll go back and I'll rewatch the series 20 times until basically I fall asleep and I'm not able to fall asleep for a day. But the
why do you do that?
It's just you always think, and I mean, to be clear, like every season, unless you win the world championship, ends in defeat.
Right,
I mean, it's just the way it is, right?
Sure.
But always when you lose, you wonder what could we have done better.
Okay.
It's always a case of could we have prepped better? Could maybe did something I say 1 week ago shake this player's confidence that maybe on a champion that maybe they could have played, but ended up not playing. Should I have pushed? Obviously, Lee Sin isn't that strong right now, but should Shadows have played Lee Sin anyway? Even though we knew it wasn't very strong and it wasn't winning. When other teams were picking it into us in scrims, it just wasn't winning. But was Shadow good enough that maybe we should have played that champion? It's hard to say, right? And these are the kind of things you think over. What I would say is that I think this loss hurt me more than other losses of Worlds have hurt me. Simply because I knew that this was my final series. So the players know now, obviously, but at the time they didn't know that it was my final game with Mad Lions.
Oh, they didn't.
No,
It was a secret to them. Wow.
Yeah, we were planning to tell them afterwards.
Okay.
Humanoid guessed. Humanoid. He's very good at reading body language, but the other four didn't know. And we were planning to tell them afterwards, which they've all been told. And I had my one-to-one debriefs, and thanks for the memories and things like this. But it really, really hurt, and I felt numb after the series. But I went back, and all of the comments. I mean, the amount of supportive comments that we got. I mean, I think there were maybe 2 negative comments and maybe over 100 positive comments. And I kind of saw those comments, and I broke down. And I'm not the kind of guy who will break down into tears much, but I just knew that this World Championships, it was the frustration of this World Championships, having to sit there in bed, being unable to do anything, and then being able to go to the studio. This is the first Worlds in China, and I got to see the studio. And like after we lost, we had our media commitments, and as our players were wandering off, I walked around the studio once as the lights were beginning to fade, and I felt
Poetic.
very, very sad. Well, poetic, but very, very sad. And I mean, all I would say is that the support, the big feeling was that we or I personally had let our fans down, and there would be it was clear to me that there was no way that we could fix this, because I mean, I wasn't going to be there next year, and I couldn't make it up to my players or make it up to our fans. And that really, really was upsetting for me. In a way that losing to Rogue 3-0 in playoffs wasn't upsetting, or losing to G2 or Fnatic in Spring Split wasn't upsetting. But definitely after that series, that was rough for me personally. But we then had debriefs with all of our players,
Hmm.
where we talked about where I had the opportunity to kind of give them more frank feedback and more direct feedback in a way that, if you're going to work with somebody next year, you can't say certain things to certain players. Maybe you can, but it's going to hurt your relationship in some way. So I was able to give really direct feedback. I'm sure people can work out what some of those points of feedback were. I'm not going to go into detail because that was a private conversation I had with
Sure.
individual players. But each of those debriefs were about an hour, and then we were in Shanghai for 5 days, enjoying all that Shanghai had to offer. Uh, yeah, but I think that most of our players didn't even watch Worlds when it started. Definitely not the first day. I think that they went to the aquarium instead of watching the first day of Worlds. So maybe they struggled more than they showed in person. But definitely outwardly, like after the Team Liquid and after the Legacy series, those were the really low points of this tournament.
So do you think there was and not to harp on this too much, do you think there was a little bit of a focus issue there, like going to the
Mm,
aquarium on first day at Worlds? Were they the only team to do
no,
something
no.
like that?
So
Sorry, did I did I
I think
mishear
that
that?
no. So first day of Worlds, the first day of Worlds group stage, probably because
Oh,
it
oh,
hurt too
oh,
much to
oh, oh,
watch.
because sorry, I thought you
Okay,
meant the first day of.
yeah,
Oh, okay, sorry,
yeah.
my
No, no,
bad.
no, 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 no,
Okay,
not
yeah, I
players,
was
not
like,
players.
what? They
I
were
think that
no, yeah, clearly.
no, 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 no. Of course, we wouldn't do that. But I would say four of our players and our coaching staff went to the aquarium. My leg was still bad, so I actually stayed at home.
Okay,
But I think only one, maybe two. I wasn't at the aquarium with them, but one or two of our players maybe watched the first day of Worlds, but the others didn't. So I don't know if they watched later days on Worlds, but definitely the first day they didn't watch. So
so one more
it
question
is
about
what it is.
Mad Lions, and then I want to focus on you for the remaining few minutes that we have in this interview. What do you think happens to the roster moving forward? I mean, there's no contracts expiring. This was obviously a disappointing result, but I'm asking your opinion here now as someone on the outside
Yeah,
looking in, but knowing what you know. Do you think this
sure.
roster changes at all going into next season?
What I will say is that I've deliberately kept myself out of roster building discussion. So everything I'm telling you now, I don't know. I don't know, but it's
Sure,
just
of course.
hypothetical. And the reason why I say that is because um, you know the whole point of this year was to hand over responsibility to Mac. And Mac, I mean, if I was to involve myself, obviously I'd give scouting reports and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's up to Mac, Cass, and Till to choose how they want to take this roster forwards. What I will say is that um, immediately afterwards, we had interest in some of our players, all of our players. I don't know about all of them, but definitely, maybe not the players that people would necessarily expect. But definitely, I think that the public perception versus what people actually in the know actually know about kind of our players is very different. This revolves around one or two players more than others. I'm not going to name any names, but it's not impossible that this roster doesn't stay together. I hope they do try to find a way. But after going through an experience like this World Championships, it's really hard to imagine a world where the five of them will stay together simply because it's a shared memory that is not very very pleasant. And I know from working on teams in the past that sometimes it's very hard without because if you have somebody new, it changes the dynamic, changes your the structure of how things function. And I think that maybe there would be change. I would be surprised if there were not, but I hope the roster tries at least to work out their differences. But I know just from the past that this is not that likely. But I'll wait to see. I'll wait to see what happens. Definitely, what I will say is that every single player will be playing LEC.
Yeah,
Hopefully on
okay,
Mad Lions, but we'll have to see. To be honest, I don't know
fair enough.
specifically. I just heard rumors, so that's all I would say.
So what about for you then? What kind of job are you looking? You posted a long message on your Twitter account. It's been shared extensively, so the community is obviously aware that you are available. So I want to dive into this before we let you go here.
Sure.
To tell me about like the kind of jobs that you are looking for in League of Legends, whether you are region specific or would you be open to traveling regions? Like what would you want to do now with your career?
My initial impression is that it's highly unlikely I will be in Europe next year. To be honest, I've developed a really close bond with the players that we have on Mad Lions, and I've worked with Mac for 4 years, and coaching against like Kazi and coaching against Mac and coaching against Humanoid is just the thought is it would be very hard for me to work out where my real loyalties lie, and I think that's that. Yeah, so I think that Europe is very unlikely. I mean, I also don't think that I can win if I work with a different org, because I think this is a really really strong roster and they should be competing for maybe not the title because G2, but they should definitely be and expecting to challenge for Worlds next year. I will say that originally I thought when I started my career, I actually wanted to collect badges in each individual regions. Like a Pokemon trainer. I've gone and coached in Brazil. I've gone and coached in China. I've gone and coached in Europe. But I'd kind of given up on that dream because of how difficult it was to coach in Korea. But now that I've seen that Yamato Cannon, as the first Western coach, the first foreign coach to coach in Korea, has made it possible, maybe I should continue my Pokemon journey and try to collect my remaining badges. I will say that I've heard, I've heard, I've had Asian offers and I've had wider American offers. What I would say is that I've heard a lot of things about how the scene functions in North America, and I my impression is that a lot of these things cannot be true. And one of the things is that I'm really really keen to find out. Obviously, if any team is interested in working with me, but as somebody who is all about scouting talent and developing talent, the idea that when people say there's no talent in North America and they blame solo queue and that kind of thing, I cannot believe that's true, and I kind of want to see that and experience that for myself because I don't believe that's the case. So yeah. So I'm looking at offers in Asia. I'm looking at offers in America. Fingers crossed there'll be something there. But looking forward to trying to build a new generation of team. And looking forward to cheering for Mad Lions in 2021. I believe this roster can do really, really well. So we'll have to see.
And would that be a coaching position, a scouting position, general manager? Like what position in particular are you looking to
Head coach,
head
strategic
coach for
coach.
sure? That's the only position. Okay.
Yeah. I think moving into a different region and switching roles is too much, right?
Okay.
If I was in Europe, maybe a different role is easier to do.
Mhm.
But when you're moving to region, you can't change your region and change your responsibility. It's just it's really complicated. It means you waste too much time uh, adapting. When you need to be on the ground running, especially because uh, now we're in preseason. And now this is when all the young talent is being signed up, right? Like the transfer window opens on the 20th of November, but I'm pretty sure that I know because I know lots of people in the ERL scene and some people in the NA Academy scene that a lot of these academy rosters are looking very, very full right now. So
What a question just popped in my mind. What do you think of Oceania and NA merging?
that's interesting. So on the Oceania side, I think it may actually be a benefit to Oceania. So it's a net loss. So it's a net loss to Oceania as a whole, right? Like obviously having the OPL was important. There's a lot of people who dedicated their lives to the OPL who were employed by the OPL. Okay, and losing that is a big deal, especially because a lot of casting talent and a lot of
Mhm.
analytical talent found their home in the OPL. But if the OCE maintains its seeds to Worlds, there will have to be open. If there's no league system, it has to be open qualifiers. And if it has to be open qualifiers, and there's no franchise system, this is an opportunity for orgs who want to get into League of Legends to get their feet wet, to test how things work. And I think you may see things like Korean, really hot Korean prospects or Chinese prospects or things like this, trying to qualify through these tournaments with MSI and Worlds on the line. I wouldn't be surprised. The visa situation with COVID is a little bit awkward right now, but
Sure.
I think you're going to see a lot of young talent trying to prove themselves to qualify for Worlds through this. And I wouldn't be surprised to see international organizations who aren't maybe already in League of Legends try to find this as a way to as an avenue into Worlds, because the rewards for qualifying for Worlds are huge, and the way that it seems that the tournament circuit is going to work give you opportunities to gain very large rewards for very little investment. And I don't just mean investment of money; I mean investment of time and that kind of thing. And I think that this will mean that there will be a lot of exposure, and especially if there are players who are coming from China and Korea, this will mean that there will be a lot of exposure. We're not just talking like a couple of thousand people; we're talking like a lot of exposure.
Sure.
For NA combining with OCE, I think that it's it's not the natural combination to combine OCE with NA. Normally, you would expect it to go to the PCS.
Sure.
But I kind of understand why they would want to combine.
Geographically, sure. Language-wise,
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it's a case of cultural versus geography, right? And I mean, I think I can kind of understand why it's being combined. What I would say is it makes players who are already in North America, who are OCE resident, suddenly become very, very valuable. Players like Fudge on Cloud9 Academy, players like FBI. I mean, FBI was already even at taking up an import slot, like worth his import slot.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely seeing, even people like Ryoma, who has been criticized a bit by the community, but when he's an NA resident, that changes his value. And I think it may signal a slight shift in how in how teams are constructed, and it will definitely benefit certain teams who planned with this kind of thing in mind. I'm not saying they knew that Oceania was going to be dissolved, right? But who brought in Oceania with players when the option was there, they're definitely going to experience a windfall right now. What I would say is that people are saying that this may be a one-off windfall. It's all of the people the pro players for the OPR and that kind of thing, making their transition into North America. I would say I wouldn't give up if you're an OPR resident, especially if the situation I described before, where other people are coming in and trying to use the OCE qualifying tournaments as a way into Worlds. They will need OCE players on those teams, and there will be lots of opportunity to show your value. I don't think it's, as long as OCE holds its world seat, the region is still going to be fine. But for how it benefits NA, I think it offers opportunities to NA. But what I would say is that there are more fundamental issues that need to be fixed in terms of the talent development pipeline in NA for NA to have long-term sustained success. I mean, I would just say, sorry, just to extend this point a little bit further. When I'm coming from Europe and I'm looking at the NA amateur scene, I feel like it's, as an EU coach, I'm playing with loaded dice. I'm like, if I wanted, so one of the players that came through the Spice Academy system, who didn't really have much exposure before, was a player called Checolad. Okay, and Checolad is now on Rogue. He's probably a top mid lane outside the LEC, maybe top 2, maybe top 3. Different people will rank him, but I don't think anyone would have him below the top 3. And Checolad was a player who played on basically amateur teams. But when we were scouting him, I could just get, he played in the Spanish league on a lower table team, and I could just get his in-client VOD replays. They just exist. Yeah, and I could do all of that scouting and things like this. And the thing about the ERL system is that there are academy teams in the ERL system, but the thing is that the level of the ERL system is not anchored by the academy team; it's anchored by the non-academy teams, right? Because academy like the NA system, the academy system, it's the league. It's very hard to cheer for individual academy teams in the NA system, because if an academy team is doing really well, especially their main team is doing really badly, you would expect those players to
those players will go up to the exactly.
Which means that, if I'm supporting who was top of academy, it was Cloud9, right? If I'm supporting Cloud9 Academy, suddenly they lose half their players. Like, what was I supporting them for this season? And I think,
unless you're already a Cloud9 fan, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, if you follow the academy team,
sure,
and then suddenly like their team has collapsed, it makes it very hard to root for them. And if you look at the regions that have really successful youth development, Europe, the ERL system is anchored by teams which are not academy teams, and in China there are teams in the LDL which are not they're not linked to LPL teams. They just exist to kind of anchor the level of the league, so that there's always somebody you could cheer for. Yeah.
We have to bring you back on just for an academy discussion. I think once you make an announcement, or once you're ready to announce what your next move is going to be, I'm just going to cross my fingers that it is an NA move, so that we can talk about the NA academy system at length, because I think that's a whole other conversation. But you've been very generous with your time, Peter. We went way over time on this, so I appreciate you sticking with us. But we got a lot of great insight here, and I'm certain that another job, wherever it may be, is definitely in your near future. You've already said you have a lot of offers coming in, so hopefully you make the right choice for yourself in your next career. And we thank you very much for joining us here on ESPN Esports.
Thank you for having me.